This land is worth millions now, Mr. Blackstone. Time to move on. Find a nice little condo somewhere else. Sign these papers today, or the bank takes your farm tomorrow.
Sign these papers today, or the bank takes your farm tomorrow. I'll never forget the way she said it. Like she was reading a weather report. Like she wasn't sitting in my kitchen, sliding a foreclosure notice across the same table my great-grandfather built with his own hands back in 1899. Vivian Hartwell, president of the HOA board over at that new development, standing there in her fancy tailored suit, reeking of expensive perfume, flashing that smug smile she probably practiced in the mirror every morning. I just stared at the paper, then at her, then back at the paper. She leaned forward, tapped her manicured finger on the foreclosure notice, and said, "This land is worth millions now, Mr. Blackstone. Prime real estate. Time to move on. Find a nice little condo somewhere. Enjoy your remaining years." Remaining years. Like I was already halfway in the grave. She didn't wait for an answer. Didn't care what I had to say. She just turned on her heel and strode out to her white Mercedes parked in my driveway, certain the victory was already hers. I watched her drive away. Watched that fancy car disappear down my dirt road. Then I looked back at the foreclosure notice, at the bank's letterhead printed at the top, at the signature line waiting for mine. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, because of something Vivian Hartwell didn't know. Something nobody in that HOA knew. Something I kept quiet for 20 years. 20 years ago, I walked away from Wall Street with more money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. But I didn't just take the money and hide. Over the years, I made some very private investments. Quiet investments. Smart investments. Investments that gave me control over far more than just my own land. Vivian Hartwell was about to learn that trying to steal a century-old family legacy comes with a price tag she never saw coming. Let me back up a bit, give you the full picture. 20 years ago, I wasn't a farmer. I was the guy who made regional banks very, very rich. Worked on Wall Street for 2 decades. Started as a grunt. Ended as the man banks called when they needed smart money moves. Mergers. Acquisitions. The kind of deals that made headlines in papers regular folks never read. I was good at it. Real good. Made a fortune. Enough that I could walk away at 55 and never work another day in my life. Enough that my kids' kids would never have to worry about a damn thing. But here's the thing about Wall Street. It chews people up, spits them out, changes them. I watched good men turn into strangers, watched marriages crumble, watched friends die of heart attacks at their desks at 50. I didn't want that. Never did. So when I left for good. Bought back the family farm. The one my great-grandfather started. The one my grandfather kept alive through the Depression. The one my father almost lost to bad luck and bad loans. Paid cash. Every acre. Then I disappeared. Quiet life. Simple life. Grew crops. Fixed fences. Let the years roll by like clouds across the sky. Nobody here knew about my past. Not the neighbors. Not the town. Definitely not the HOA when they built that development next door. To them, I was just old man Blackstone, the farmer in the beat-up truck who kept to himself. I liked it that way, but I also kept my ear to the ground, stayed connected in ways nobody could see, made those private investments I mentioned, small stakes in local banks, quiet shares in regional financial institutions, nothing flashy, nothing that would raise eyebrows, just enough. Enough that when Vivian Hartwell walked into my kitchen with that foreclosure notice, she had no idea she was threatening a man who quietly owned pieces of half the banks in this county, including the one trying to take my farm. Now let me tell you about Vivian Hartwell. She moved into that development about 5 years ago, bought the biggest lot, the biggest house, the one with the fountain out front that shot water 20 feet in the air, made sure everyone knew she'd arrived. Within 6 months, she was on the HOA board. Within a year, she was president. And within 2 years, she turned that neighborhood into her personal kingdom. She loved the power. Loved telling people what they could and couldn't do with their own property. Loved finding folks for grass that was half an inch too tall or paint that didn't match some color chart she kept in her binder. I heard stories. We all did. The young couple she forced to repaint their front door 3 times. The retired veteran she fined every week until he sold and moved. The family with the autistic kid who liked to play in the front yard. She cited them for excessive lawn activity. Excessive lawn activity. I'm not making that up. But Vivian wanted more than control over mailboxes and shrubbery. She wanted the land itself. Specifically my land. See, her development was landlocked. Nowhere to expand except onto my farm. And with housing prices going through the roof, my 100+ acres were worth a fortune. Millions, like she said. She figured if she could get rid of me, she could convince the rest of the HOA to buy my land, develop it, sell the lots at a massive profit. She'd be a hero, a legend, maybe even get her name on a street sign. So she started scheming. First came the nuisance complaints. Dust from my tractors, noise from my equipment, smell from my fields. She called the county so many times they stopped answering. Then came the code enforcement visits. Inspectors showing up to check my fences, my outbuildings, my well. Never found a thing out of compliance. When that didn't work, she went after my taxes. Challenged my agricultural exemption. Lost. Tried again. Lost again. Finally, she found her weapon. A small regional bank where I'd refinanced some equipment years ago. She didn't know my history with banks. Didn't know who she was dealing with. All she saw was a loan. A foreclosure opportunity. A way to force me out. She convinced enough board members to pool resources, put pressure on the bank, make it worth their while to call on my loan. And it worked. Mostly. That foreclosure notice on my kitchen table, Vivian Hartwell's fingerprints were all over it. She just didn't know whose fingerprints were all over the bank. I let her have her victory for exactly 3 days. 3 days of her thinking she'd won. 3 days of her telling anyone who'd listen how she'd finally cracked the stubborn old farmer. 3 days of her picking out which part of my land she'd name after herself. I spent those 3 days doing research. Not because I needed to. I already knew exactly what I'd find. But because I wanted to be thorough. Wanted to have every number, every document, every piece of paper lined up perfectly. When you've spent decades in banking, you learn one thing above all else. Paperwork wins. Every time. On the 4th morning, I made a phone call. Didn't call Vivian. Didn't call the HOA. Called the bank. Specifically, called the chairman of the board. A man named Harrison Cole. Nice guy. Gray hair, gold watch, handshake like a vice grip. I'd sat on his board quietly for 11 years. Never said much at meetings. Never made waves. Just collected my dividends and kept my mouth shut. Harrison, I said when he picked up. It's John Blackstone. Long pause. Then John. Good morning. What can I do for you? I told him. Laid it out plain and simple. Told him about the foreclosure notice. Told him about Vivian Hartwell's involvement. Told him I expected it resolved by end of business Friday. Another long pause. Longer this time. John, I wasn't aware. I know you weren't. That's not your fault. It's handled now. Of course. I'll make some calls. I thanked him. Hung up. Went back to my coffee. That afternoon, Vivian Hartwell got a phone call of her own. I don't know exactly what was said, but I heard later from a friend on the HOA board that she went pale. Locked herself in her office for an hour. Came out looking like she'd seen a ghost. The foreclosure notice wasn't just stopped. It was erased. Voided. Like it never existed. And the bank's board had some very pointed questions about how one of their customers ended up targeted by an HOA president with connections to a board member's brother-in-law who happened to work at the bank. Small world. Gets even smaller when you own pieces of it. The monthly HOA meeting was 3 days later. I'd never attended one. Never had a reason. My property wasn't in their development. Their rules didn't apply to me. And I had better things to do than listen to people argue about trash cans. But that night, I put on a clean shirt, brushed the hay off my boots, and drove my beat-up old truck to the clubhouse. Walked in right at 7 o'clock. Every head turned. You could hear a pin drop. Vivian was at the podium, already mid-sentence about something. She saw me and her mouth kept moving, but no sound came out. Just stood there frozen. I found a seat in the back. Nodded at a few folks I recognized. Crossed my arms and waited. The meeting limped along for about 20 minutes. Nobody could focus. Everyone kept glancing at me. then at Vivian, then back at me. The tension was thick enough to cut with a hay knife. Finally, near the end, Vivian opened the floor to new business. I stood up. Every eye in the room locked onto me. "I'm John Blackstone," I said. "I own the farm next door. Some of you know me. Most of you don't. That's fine. I'm not here to make trouble." Pause. Let that sink in. I'm here because I heard there's been some discussion about acquiring my land, about developing it, about making it part of this community. Vivian's face went red, then white, then red again. "Here's what I want you to know," I continued. "That farm has been in my family since 1899. It's not for sale. It's never been for sale. It's never going to be for sale. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." I looked directly at Vivian, and anyone who tries to take it through back channels, through bank loans, through pressure tactics, they're going to find out real quick that they picked the wrong fight. Silence. Absolute silence. I tipped my hat. Didn't even own a hat. Just did it for effect and walked out. Behind me, I heard someone start clapping, then someone else, then half the room. Vivian Hartwell stood frozen at the podium, watching her little empire crumble in real time. That was 6 months ago. Vivian Hartwell doesn't run the HOA anymore. She resigned 2 weeks after that meeting. Cited personal reasons. The personal reason was that nobody on the board trusted her. Nobody wanted to be associated with her. She'd burned too many bridges trying to build her little kingdom. The new HOA president, nice woman named Patricia. She actually waved at me the other day when I drove past. Brought me a pie last month. Apologized for everything that happened. Said most folks in the development never wanted trouble with me anyway. I appreciated that. Told her no hard feelings. Meant it. The foreclosure notice is long gone. So is the pressure from the bank. Funny how quickly problems disappear when the right people make a few phone calls. I still own every acre my great-grandfather bought. Still wake up before sunrise. Still tend the alfalfa and fix the fences and do all the things farmers do. Still sit on my porch with my coffee every morning and watch the sun come up over land that's been in my family for over 100 years. But now, when I look over at that development, I don't see enemies. Just neighbors. Some of them wave. I wave back. Vivian, she still lives in the big corner house with the fountain. Still drives that white Mercedes. Still walks around like she's better than everyone else. But she doesn't look my way anymore. Doesn't make eye contact when we pass. Keeps her head down and her mouth shut. Good. Because here's the thing about people like Vivian. They think power comes from titles, from positions, from standing behind podiums and signing papers and telling other people what to do. They're wrong. Power comes from knowing who you are, from knowing what you built, from knowing that no piece of paper, no foreclosure notice, no smug HOA president can take away something that's been rooted in the same soil for 4 generations. Vivian Hartwell learned that the hard way. Cost her a lot. Reputation, respect, her seat on the board, probably a few friendships. Me. Cost me a phone call and an hour at a boring meeting. Best investment I ever made. So what would you do if someone tried to take your family's legacy? Drop it in the comments. I read every one. And let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing all the different places this reaches. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more tales from the farm. I've got plenty. See you next time.